Okay, and so with that, I would like to call this meeting to order. I'd like to call this being our 8th meeting of the Greater Hill District Neighborhood Reinvestment Fund Advisory Board to order. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. Please mute yourself if you're not speaking. If you would like to ask a question or give comment today, please use the raise hand function. We ask that you turn on your camera so that your name appears when you speak. Please feel free to cover the camera on your device if you not wish to appear on the screen. Just also need to remind individuals that if you have not returned your conflict of interest form at this time, you are not permitted to participate in any motions or votes today. With that, we'll move on to the roll call, and I'll ask Julia to please take the roll.
Thank you, Councilman. Is the representative from District 6 present?
Oh, present, that's me, sorry.
Is the representative from the Hill CDC present?
Present.
Mr. Witherspoon emailed me and said he wasn't coming today, but just for the record, is the representative of the Hill District Federal Credit Union present? Is the representative of the Hill District Consensus Group present? Is the representative of the Wesley Center AME Zion Church present?
I do not expect him to be on today.
Okay. Is the representative from the Shenley Heights Community Development Program present? Is the representative of the Historic Hill Institute present? Is the representative of Ujamaa Collective present?
I am here, and actually as a side note, I'm in the car on my way to pick my son up from school. So there's going to be a moment when I'll put on my headphones and go inside to try to still listen, but I'm going to have to get out of the car and be in transition.
Thank you for letting us know. Much appreciated. Is the representative of the Office of State Representative Ariane Abney present?
Yes, present.
Is the representative of the Office of County Executive Fitzgerald present? Is the representative of the Office of the Mayor present?
Yep.
Executive Fitzgerald is here, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Dan. Is the representative of the Pittsburgh Public School District present? And is the representative of Allegheny County Council present? All right, that's the roll call. Thank you so much. Hannah, can you tell us if we have quorum?
I do not believe we have quorum. It appears only 2 of the 7 voting members are present.
Yeah, just for clarity, we have quorum of the body. We do not have quorum of voting members. So we can proceed with the meeting, but until we receive quorum of voting members, we won't be able to take action.
I agree.
Thank you. So with that, 2 quick points. 1, I'm just going to ask everyone to bear with me as I'm getting over a cold. And so if my voice cracks or something, please bear with me. 2, I want to welcome Lisa Frank with us today, who is the Chief Operating and Administrative Officer for the Administration Office of Mayor Ed Gainey. So just wanted to welcome her and allow her to say anything, should she so wish.
To say thank you, and this is my first meeting, so I'm sure I have some things to learn, and I'll follow along. And if people will permit me to ask questions, even if they seem pretty obvious to everybody else, then that would be nice. Thanks.
Thank you. So with that, that'll now move us on to old business. And regarding our meeting schedule, the next Greater Hill District Neighborhood Reinvestment Fund Advisory Board meeting will be held the week of November 14th with a target date and time of Thursday, November 13th at 3 p.m. Given we don't have a quorum of members, we don't need a motion to approve that date. What I'll simply ask is the URA to work on scheduling that, and then via email, we can then take a vote, if that's okay.
Councilman, if I can interject, it looks like RB Bankston's joined us, and I believe that is Alicia George.
That is correct.
Thank you for joining us. I believe we now have quorum of voting members.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And Dr. Ellis, have you also joined us?
I am sorry, I did not see you, Dr. Ellis. We have Dr. Ellis as well.
Okay, so that should give us quorum.
Yes, thank you so much.
So do we have a motion to direct the URA staff to schedule the next meeting of this board for the week of November 14th?
I motion that we direct the URA to schedule it.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Aye.
The motion passes. Thank you. Next up is the draft application. As you all are aware, in advance of this meeting, the URA staff shared category definitions in three drafts, Greater Hill District Neighborhood Reinvestment Fund applications for the advisory board to review. The definitions and applications were updated with directions from this advisory board at our last meeting. I'm gonna ask James to present the definitions, and then we will also go over the feedback that the URA staff received from advisory board members. James, are you with us? Looking.
Yes, good afternoon. Good afternoon, members of the advisory board. My name is James Reed. I'm the manager of strategic initiatives here at the URA. I've been supporting the rest of the URA staff on this project. And so what I will move forward in doing, I believe we circulated a draft of these definitions a few weeks ago, but I will see, Julia and Gordon, are those definitions included in the slide presentation? Perfect, fantastic. Okay, so we'll just take these one by one, and if you bear with me, I will read the definitions aloud as well as pause for some time for folks to reflect on them on their own. So we will start with the first definition for mortgage assistance subsidies. And we have defined that as financial assistance to defray a portion of the total amount of expenses due to monthly mortgage payments, taxes, and/or utilities for homeowners experiencing financial hardship. These funds are only available to those persons who own a home within the Greater Hill District. We're going to have discussion about these later, so I'm going to take all of these and then we'll open it up for discussion. Job placement programs, those programs that connect employees and employers. These funds are restricted to programs that assist one, job seekers who live within the Greater Hill District, two, employers located in the Greater Hill District, and three, employers who intend to hire job seekers who live within the Greater Hill District. And by way of example, programs run by an employment placement agency, programs run by social service agencies, programs run by recruiters or headhunters. And again, these are just examples that they're not meant to be exhaustive. Workforce development initiatives, those programs, projects, processes, and activities that further the efforts of one, social services, community supports, job training, and education that position individuals for success in the workforce, and two, training programs that provide existing and potential workers with the skills to complete tasks needed by employers to let the organization stay competitive in a global market. These funds are restricted to those services and programs that aid workers and job seekers that live in the Greater Hill District. And by way of example, grants for job training or certificate programs. Next slide, please. Administration, those processes and activities related to the management of the Greater Hill District Neighborhood Reinvestment Fund, including the administration of the Community Collaboration and Implementation Plan. Please note, this does not include fees due to the URA and Pittsburgh Public Schools. Examples of activities here, implementation of the CSIP and the GHDNRF, communications, reporting and tracking, fund management consultants and other activities. The next definition is for children and youth education initiatives. Those programs, projects, processes, and activities that provide educational services to children and youth. These funds are restricted to those organizations providing services to children and youth of the Greater Hill District. And by way of examples, after school and weekend activities, including but not limited to sports, dance, music, STEAM, tutoring, etc., or funding to existing programs that advance educational pursuits. Rent assistance subsidies, financial assistance to defray a portion of the total amount of expenses due to monthly rent and/or utilities for renters experiencing financial hardship. These funds are restricted to those persons renting a housing unit within the Greater Hill District. Next page. Development initiatives. Those programs, projects, processes, and activities that further the improvement of land and structures. These funds are restricted to supporting commercial and mixed-use development initiatives within the Greater Hill District. And by way of example, grants or loans to support pre-development and development activities. Housing initiatives. Those programs, projects, processes, and activities that further the construction and/or improvement of housing. These funds are restricted to housing located within the Greater Hill District. By way of example, construction of new housing, renovation or rehabilitation of existing housing, including but not limited to roof repairs and accessibility improvements. Project development. Those processes and activities undertaken to create a unique product, service, or result. Priority will be given to non-residential community-focused projects. These funds are restricted to projects undertaken in the Greater Hill District. By way of example, community garden sidewalk repairs. MWBE development initiatives. Those programs, projects, processes, and activities focused on the formation and growth of MWBEs. These funds are restricted to supporting MWBEs either based in the Greater Hill District or undertaking a project located in the Greater Hill District. By way of example, grants and loans to MWBE firms undertaking projects or expanding their businesses. Next, thank you. MWBE business counseling initiatives. Those programs, projects, processes, and activities providing technical assistance, i.e. advice, guidance, or instruction on the formation, management, financing, and operation of MWBE businesses. These funds are restricted to supporting MWBEs either based in the Greater Hill District or undertaking a project located in the Greater Hill District. By way of example, MWBE certification costs. Historic Hill institutional preservation. Any expenditure made or estimated to be made or monetary obligations incurred or estimated to be incurred, which are listed in a program or project plan as costs associated with the preservation of Hill District institutions. Priority consideration will be given to those historic Hill institutions that have difficulties accessing traditional funding, such as federal grants, loans, etc. By way of example, operations or staffing costs, program costs, capital expenditures, or legacy costs. Recurring revenue initiatives under community control. Expenditures used to support or fund programs, projects, processes, or activities that leverage and/or invest GHDNRF proceeds in such a way that they produce funding, whether interest, dividends, or equity returns to Hill District residents, institutions, organizations, or businesses. By way of example, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and other financial instruments, social or impact investing, program-related investments, investments or deposits at Black-owned banks. And other wealth building initiatives. Those programs, projects, processes, and activities focused on generating wealth for existing residents and business owners within the Greater Hill District. By way of example, leveraging the Lower Hill redevelopment projects to create new businesses or enhance existing businesses with an initial priority focus on businesses owned by Greater Hill District residents. Create employee-owned cooperative with focus on energy, cleaning, agriculture, or other opportunity, preferably with growth potential. Excuse me. Create resident-owned cooperatives with focus on ownership of real estate or other assets. Create a program with the URA and Hill CDC to foster economic development into the Center Ave corridor in tandem with the development site. Foster commercial development in the Greater Hill District and in particular along commercial corridors, and leverage mixed income residential and commercial developments to create new businesses or enhance existing businesses with an initial priority focus on businesses owned by Greater Hill District residents. I believe that was the last of the definitions. I am not, I'll ask the co-chairs if they would prefer to take some comments or discussion at this point, or do that a little bit later.
We can do discussion now.
Do you want to, Julia or Gordon, could you go to the next slide? Maybe just we can start with a review of the feedback that was received. We'll move to Dr. Ellis's. Dr. Ellis, is there anything that you would like to offer as a preamble before we dive into your comments?
I would. Thank you so much. I was looking at all the definitions, and I think that overall, we were supposed to have done an audit in terms of like what we have already with government or private investment and things like that. And I realized that because we hadn't done an audit already in our definitions, I'm generally fine with most of the definitions, but that I found like a reoccurring theme that we should look to monies that have been granted already for these particular definitions. So sidewalk repairs, like I'm certainly supportive of sidewalk repairs, but I know that the RAISE grant, for example, exists, right? And so the question is, should we, I think like when people apply, we have a responsibility, and I think that perhaps the responsibility lies more on government than us as private citizens, but that we have a responsibility to say, there's also these monies available, and we want to make sure that you get this money. So I need us to kind of find a way to work through that process. So ultimately, that's what I mean. And then I went down the list for some of the different things that are available. You want me to keep going through those definitions?
That would be great.
Okay, sure. So it's the same thing with rent subsidy. So case in point, like the Urban League and other groups have rent subsidy. And this is all with the idea to expand the LRTA funds, right, and make them last. So I don't want to put anybody off, but I just think that when they apply and say, I need rent assistance, that the URA would say, we have some LRTA money for you. We want you to also apply to the Urban League and to this organization and that organization so that you get the assistance that you need. Because what we have allotted and what we give out for a particular rent subsidy, it may not be enough for that person. That person may need 3 to 6 months subsidy, and maybe we only have 1 to 2 months or something like that. I mean, we're in a crisis, so you can imagine there's going to be a lot of people asking for rent subsidy. The same with the mortgage subsidy. I was thinking in particular about First National Bank has increased its mortgage loan assistance to $5,000. That's really important. All the banks are competing now. So I think that we should definitely take advantage of the banks opening up their pockets There's also utility assistance, I think was mentioned in that definition, from People's Gas and Duquesne Light. So, I just, just making sure that everybody's taking advantage of the assets that we also have in government. And also that grants should be made for taxes, because I don't know if there's any entity that will help you pay for your property taxes. And the property taxes are the most important. If you don't pay that, you lose your property. So I just said that grants should be made for people's property taxes. With the job placement programs, I just kind of asked, just should the First Source Center applicants be prioritized given its stated purpose? I'm totally open to anybody else, but it just made me think about that because this is our second First Source Center. With workforce development, I said same as above regarding the applicants of the First Source Center. Oh, yes. So I guess this is just some more like guidance. But because we got granular with the definitions, I got granular as well. So I said, oftentimes individuals need transportation assistance, child care assistance, and other workforce development assistance funds. Those are not monies that are typically covered in any kind of grant or any kind of like from the work that we've been doing. They give money for like workforce development, but they don't necessarily give money for childcare. And I've had, just because I work at the First Source Center, I've seen a lot of examples of people who cannot make it to the job because of lack of transportation or the lack of childcare. So just to kind of supplement would be a really good thing to add to the definition. I said funds for development and or housing initiatives should be restricted from certain nonprofits in the historic Hill District. Oh yeah, this is a good one. As there's a deep and abiding fear of Hill residents around the Hill CDC's self-dealing specifically. And I'm just addressing this because of the different things that we've heard. Like people are very concerned about who controls the money, about who consistently controls the money, and self-dealing. I just made that pretty plain. Housing initiatives should be prioritized to individual homeowners first, and then institutions, because that was in the definition. It just kind of said homeowners and institutions. And I think it's like very, very important for us to protect individual homeowners first, and then institutions that provide housing and so on and so forth, because they oftentimes do have more money, and they like it's literally an institution in and of itself. I mean, we could take it case by case, but those are the general thoughts there. The next slide, because I know I had several. Yeah, so I addressed the raise funds and infrastructure funds. I said MWBE for development should be for development initiatives only. I think in the definition, it just made it more broad. And I just think that there's only so much money that's going to go to MWBEs for development. So I thought it should be very specific for development initiatives only. And then with business counseling, it's kind of the same thing, that the applicant should at least, I think it's on the URA, honestly, to inform people. But they should show some type of an awareness or sign up for business resources or programs, such as the Riverside Center for Innovation or small business development programs at, Duquesne University, at University of Pittsburgh, at CMU. I mean, the list goes on. And then I just wanted to definitely advise, because we're talking about guidelines and definitions, that those people who are focused on construction MWBEs should be directed to the small contractors line of credit program that's held at the URA. A lot of people still don't know about this program, and we really need contractors to take advantage because it's $100,000. The last one, the last two, other wealth building initiatives. Number 4, that addressed a very specific program. It said something like the URA and the Hill CDC should engage in a program. And I just think that should be opened up. 1, there's other RCOs. 2, there's other development RCOs. And that I don't think that as a part of the definition, right, that no exclusive programming should be made with the Hill CDC, with a government organization that's supposed to reflect many more voices in the Hill District and will feed and support the entire Center Avenue corridor. And then last but not least, create a program with the URA. Oh yeah, so now I just quoted that. Sorry, I quoted that it said create a program with the URA and Hill CDC. And I don't think that should be a part of the definition. Moving forward. So those are my concerns.
Thank you for voicing those concerns, Dr. Ellis. Just a few points of clarification. The last couple of items that you mentioned under other wealth building initiatives, those were mentioned as examples and they were plucked directly from the language in the CSIP. So the way that URA staff is operating is that the definitions would be what was in the category description, and the examples would just be that examples. They would actually not fall within the formal consideration of the definition. So they would just be there for, either interpretive purposes or guidance purpose, not as a hard and fast way of saying that you must use the funds to support this particular, just by way of example.
Okay, all right.
I believe that was all of the feedback. Yes, Ms. Frank.
Well, I have some feedback.
I saw
RB.
Chief Frank's hand up, and then we'll go to Arby.
Okay.
Although if people are gonna address Dr. Ellis's things directly, mine is a little bit off that. So Arby, I don't know if you're gonna continue this line of discussion.
Well, actually, some of that is true, but I'm looking at it from a high level. I think this is a good start. I think that we have a lot of gaps. For instance, we say Hill District resident. Well, it's alerted district. The money can only be utilized within the alerted district. So we need to define that. There's no method of verification in any of the applications to verify that the person is there other than the address. Okay, so that needs to be, there's no audit of fund usage subsequent to the grant or loan. And there's nothing in there about how that should be handled. You got to make sure there's no analysis that says, well, does the Hill need this? So now here's where I'm coming from. The Hill itself has significant issues that have been long-standing. And had a meeting Monday, and one of the comments was, well, what do the residents want in terms of small business? Now, I support all small business for the Hill. Mm-hmm. However, we don't have the residents that we should have to support small business. So there needs to be a focus on bringing residents, attracting residents to the Hill. And we have challenges there. And if we don't do that, I'm yet to see small business survive without foot traffic. And that foot traffic needs to have disposable income to spend at that small business. For example, a lot of people want market rate because they think that there's going to be a different caliber of person with market rate. And I agree, skin in the game, ownership is key to, it's a foundation, a pier of having a strong community. However, I don't think if you look at the demographics for Pittsburgh that we have that demographic in sufficient numbers. So we have to look at some other alternative ways of home ownership, cooperative housing, things of that nature, just not rent, home ownership. And nothing is being done in that regard, because the median income on the Hill is 22,000, give or take. The median income for the city, depending on which source you look at, the American Family Survey from 2020, 50,000, 55,000. And we don't have residents that even approach that. We don't have residents that are making $15 an hour. $15 an hour is 31.2. The median income for the Allegheny County is 83,000. So we have problems there, and we don't have anything to help people raise their income so that they don't need affordable housing, so that we have a higher caliber of resident, and we can have our school system improve internally because people have skin in the game. So none of these things that I see in the application have any milestones or schedule required. There's no analysis of what is this needed. So now here I'm gonna say this. From my perspective, the URA has a mandate to take vacant property, get it back on the tax roll. Vacant building, get it back on the tax roll. The city needs a tax revenue, and I agree with that. However, the Hill is part of the city, so looking at the Hill is a distressed neighborhood. And because it's a distressed neighborhood, it has to be looked at differently. We need to bring residents back to the Hill. People say historic Hill district. I want it to be a living historic Hill district, not a historic Hill district that you read about or see pictures in a museum, because all the Black residents are gone. So there's no analysis. Rehabbing of existing buildings should be a priority because of the income disparity. Yes, there's down payment assistance, and I've asked for a effectiveness review of all these programs that people mentioned. How effective are they for the Hill District residents? I had a young woman's on Monday's evening's meeting. Okay, she said that she almost couldn't buy a house because she wasn't being assisted, and it took some people from in the community to walk her through it. So there's probably many more stories like that. So money should be allocated to combine other available programs, educate what is available. And what I mean by that, there's all these mentions of these different programs. There's no one source of where these programs can be found and how to utilize it. So that would help the resident. Okay, so the money that comes out of this fund, because we don't have a recurring deposit and we got 4% going to one RCO unnecessarily. And and people are going to find out about that, and that's just crazy. But because we need every dime we can get, because this rebuilding the Hill is going to take at least a decade. We have so many problems, and it's going to take time. And there needs to be a last resort for the funds because of these other programs that are available. And I'm asking again, I asked in February for effectiveness review. And what I mean by that is, how effective is that program for the Hill District residents? I was told I was going to get that, and now it is October. I still have not seen it. And Dr. Ellis just mentioned the same thing. And there's nothing in there in these applications that verify outcome. Well, is that a reasonable outcome? How would you measure that? Okay, what report? There's nothing reporting back to the community. Hey, we're on track for this. We're not here. There's no reporting back system at all. Nothing is in place. This entity wanted their 4% instead of writing a procedure, helping to write a procedure where we wouldn't be doing this now. We should have been doing this 6 months ago. But the 4% was more important. So the last thing is the other RCOs in the Hill need to be included in this application process. They need to get a chance to review it and have their comments discussed and incorporated, however that goes. So, just us doing it in a vacuum, I don't think that's right, because in reality, the RCOs are representatives of the Hill District residents, and they need to have a voice in how these applications are developed and so forth. It just can't be us on the advisory board. And I have many more comments, but I'll stop there.
Just if I may, Councilman Lavelle, just really quickly to touch on the items that are related to these definitions, and mostly that's to just respond that the purpose of these definitions are to support the allocation plan, which is a fairly limited tool that we're using as a guidepost for the first year to just have a way of saying this is potentially how funds will be expended. RB, a lot of the comments that you brought up, to my mind, are things that would be better related to sort of administrative guidance for how we are, on the back end, once we have applications that are solidified, right? Like the tracking that you mentioned, all of that to me is more of some administrative items on the back end. And so I take your point that those things are needed to be developed. But just for the purposes of the definitions in this part of the conversation, they really are just related to putting some description around the allocation categories that we discussed at the last meeting, so that this advisory board would have something with more teeth to understand what each of those categories reflected. So just wanted to note that we're talking a little more narrowly with these categories and these definitions than the questions and comments that you raised.
Well, I disagree. And the reason why I disagree is that this application needs to be a package so that the people understand what is required of them. And just because you got some definitions, the definitions have hidden things behind them that need to be explained, and they need to be visible so people understand what's required. The definitions need work, okay? Because there's no verification. There's no, there's nothing that says, hey, if you're coming to us as the first choice, and there's other government funding. The other government funding is reoccurring funding. This is not reoccurring funding. We got one deposit that was supposed to be 7.5 million. 300,000 wasn't deposited. So we got 7.2. We got another supposed to come 4 million. Okay. And when the next deposit occurs, depends on when the next parcel is taken down and ownership is transferred. So this money has to be on point. It can't be given. I can understand the grant, and the people should come first because we need to retain our residents. Okay, so right now, the way you have this piecemeal, that's not how you do a process. You got part of the process up front, and then you're going to tell them about all these other requirements that should be there so that they understand, hey, we need to know that what you want the money for in terms of a small business, for example, is going to be useful for the community and is sustainable. Because you don't want to give money and then find out a year later, because historically, after 5 years, you only have 20% of your businesses, small businesses still operate. So, the Hill needs a bakery. We don't have a bakery. We don't have a dry cleaner. We don't have a pharmacy. Okay. We don't have quite a few things that people have to travel outside of the community to get these essential items. So there's a lot more to this than just some definition. Putting them on paper, getting it. No, that's why the other RCOs need to be involved in this process so that everybody has some ownership. Then you have a successful approach. Right now, we're doing this lone wolf thing. And some of, people are concerned about, where's the money? How's the money? There's no audit of, all right, where's the money? How's it going? All those things that the layperson is questioning are valid questions. And we need to answer those questions up front with a process that's transparent.
That's all very true, RB, but you can't do that in shaping definition.
So the application is part of, I got applications.
Definitions portion of it.
Right, but I'm looking at the whole application. I'm looking at the whole thing.
We haven't, I understand that, but we haven't gotten there yet. Right now, we're strictly dealing with the definitions. We will review, the next agenda item is to review the actual applications themselves. And just for the record, because the dollars are housed within the URA, they absolutely get audited.
Well, there's nothing that indicates that. Nothing in writing. How, the money was used and so forth and so I looked at the application, I looked at the definitions. The definitions are very broad and they can lead to a lot of misinterpretation. There's no specific. Okay, so that just,
But that
when
was
you have a layperson,
just per our last meeting's conversation, and I want to let others chime in here. But per our last conversation, what was asked was us provide definitions that would be guidelines. They would not be hard and fast. They would not be specific, meaning if you propose something that was slightly different than what was in the guidelines, that couldn't be considered. But what was asked, what this committee asked us to provide back was sort of a general guidelines of what we were talking about, so the average citizen could understand is what I'm interested in falling within this category. We weren't trying to achieve all specificity, because the advisory board does have the ability to choose as they shall, if they want to approve something that falls slightly in or outside of these guidelines.
well, I thought the definitions were for the advisory board to be able to better find, for lack of a better way to characterize it, to better focus on whether or not a project is suitable for the Hill. And they don't help me do that as written. So I understood what they asked was, but it's supposed to be guidelines for us as going in the procedure. And there's a disconnect between the guideline and in the procedure, which these definitions would become a part of, and the actual application. There's a gap.
Okay.
I think that's going to cause more delay than we should fix that. So I understand what you're saying, but there are gaps, and the gaps need to be addressed. We need to get more people involved than just us, the other RCOs.
Well, the other RCOs are at this table. The people at this table need to be the ones working to solve this.
We are.
Right.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. Okay, and again, my question is just a little bit off from this a little bit, but I did, and I think you possibly already answered it, James. So I noticed that in some of the, I think in the definitions, but maybe it was just in the examples, that it specified grant or specified loan. And I just sort of wondered, like, if it's left unspecified, does that mean it's both, or does that kind of come later when we're going through the allocation plan? I know I'm dropping into this process kind of midway. So I heard you mention an allocation plan, and I suppose that's related to how much we give and how much we reinvest and all of that. So did that already all happen? And if so, can somebody send me the stuff and maybe catch me up? Or if it's still to come, just tell me that.
Yeah,
Hi, Lisa. Yep, this is Julia. I have a packet that I'm going to send you with all the past presentations and meetings and links, so you'll have everything. I just generally didn't get it to you today because I generally do it after people send me the conflict of interest form, so I get them.
No, and it's really not a complaint. It's just that in some ways the definitions raise this like super obvious question, which is, we can't do it. Are grants kind of capped annually, or you can't? I'm sure it could just all be given away in year one, and I'm sure that's not really what people's intent is. And so, to the extent that the definitions need to specify whether things are loans or grants, we might want to do that. Or if it's both, then I guess it just kind of shows up in the allocation plan.
So, the third column, really, those were just examples. They were primarily to be illustrative. I don't think that we've gotten to a point where we've had a prescriptive, it needs to take this form, it needs to take that form. But I wanted to provide just a little meat, perhaps to help people conceptualize what that may be. And so with the way that these are just sort of reflect, like when you get your packet, you'll see that the allocation plan has every category named. And then the task really for URA staff was to consider what is a description for that category, so that the advisory board and then folks as they are processing things, can have some frame of reference to say, this is what we're talking about, this is what we're not. And we did try to take a very broad definition with these descriptions, or make broad descriptions, just because it's very hard to capture what exactly is needed. And I certainly didn't want to limit any potential creativity that might come and be shown in applications.
Super helpful. Sorry, I'm playing catch up here, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the allocation plan. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to add actually that we did actually go through each one of these. And for the most part, we said that most of these are grants with the exception of profit bearing activities. So case in point for MWBE development initiatives, like providing the seed money, for example, for an MWBE to be able to bid on a project or do pre-development, that would be a loan. Rent subsidy obviously would be things like a grant. So we actually did take the time to do that. Councilman Lavelle, I don't know if it was a different form that we did it on, but we should make that explicit. I totally agree. And I think that we could do it pretty swiftly, because really a lot of these programs, they will largely be grants, because this is a low income community. Which is another reason why we said we were going to do an audit, right? And that we were going to make an audit of the resources available throughout the city and the state to make sure that any applicant was taking advantage of everything to offer, right? You can't just come to the LRTA for your one-stop shop of all the things that are ailing us as a community, because like you said, it could be gone in one day.
Okay, is there any other feedback and or questions regarding the actual definitions? If not,
Councilman, I just want to go on record before we call this to a vote, if that's what we're going to do next. I'm not sure. And just let the record reflect that the Hill CDC objects to the erroneous and intentionally inflammatory language that was utilized, and that there's no evidence to support that. And then also to let the record reflect that the CSIP language oftentimes refers to the Hill CDC, because that's the organization that facilitated a lot of the process that led to the signing of the CSIP, the Community Benefits Agreement, and also the organization that secured the LRTA for the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let the record reflect that the LRTA was a TIF and the CSIP, and was changed to a LRTA by the city. So I don't have a problem with certain things, but you got to be accurate and truthful.
Let RB, the LRTA was a result of a lawsuit that the Hill CDC filed
The
in
lawsuit
2015
that you
against the
filed
city.
was to get the
We don't need to go
CSIP
back and
attached
forth
to the
about it, RB.
PLDT. Well, you started.
We
The
don't need to go
lawsuit
back
you
and forth about
filed
it.
was to get the
We're going to move
PLDT,
forward now.
the CSIP added
We're
to the
going to move forward
PLDT.
now.
It had
We're
nothing
gonna
to
move
do
forward
with the
now.
TIF and the LRTA.
We're going to
stop
move
it.
forward now. We're going to move forward now. Thank you.
So with that
No,
being
RB
said,
should be given a chance to speak. Like we can't have
hold
the
on, Dr.
co-chair
Ellis.
talking over people.
We're not going to relitigate the LRTA in this meeting. We're not doing that on all sides. With that being said, Dr. Ellis provided significant feedback on the definitions. I think that based on prior meetings and conversations of this committee, that we all one-stop shop for your assistance. So to the extent that there are other resources available, whether it's rent, whether it's mortgage assistance, all the programs that URA provides, that different banks provides, that we would be asking people, have you gone there? Have you applied for those applications prior to coming for these dollars? And I think we can make the definitions reflect that. And I think the actual application actually does reflect that. But we can certainly do that. I, for one, would not be supportive of writing into definitions any language that would prohibit any organization in our community from applying for funding. But I think many of her other inputs are understood, and I think we can clean up the language a little. Are there any final comments on the definitions before we move on to reviewing the actual applications? And I am trying to move us along, because I know a number of people have hard stops, so that's why I'm trying to move us along.
Dan, we need to use LERTA district. That's consistent with the CSIP, not just the Hill district.
Just so I'm making sure I understand, you're asking that when we state that these funds can only be used for Hill District residents, you prefer for it to say residents within the LERTA district?
Yes, yes. We need to
I'm okay
have
with
people
that.
understanding
Just
that.
to clarify really quickly, Arby, and I can go back and make sure that this language is uniform across the definitions, but it does say the greater Hill district, and that is another term that the LERTA district is referred to in many of the agreements that govern the use of these funds.
Well, there's a map in the CSIP
And we can certainly include the map, but you'll see that it says that it refers to the LERTA district as the Greater Hill District, and we can make sure that both of those languages appear to reduce any confusion, and we can also include a map.
Okay, so you're going to refer to the map so the people can see the boundaries. See, that's the thing, is that the Hill District itself, the boundaries are not defined clearly by everyone. Everybody has a different perception of what they think the Hill District boundary is. That's what I'm trying to clarify. So if you use the map, yeah. Okay,
we can include the map.
Yeah, and just say it's a LERTA district, because I'm pretty sure that's what the state act says. The funds can only be expended within the LERTA district.
That can be clarified. With that, if we could move on to, so I don't believe we're in a position to vote on the actual definitions today. What we'll go back and do and work with Julia and Gordon and others is to just clean up the language to reflect some of the concerns that were brought forward. And then hopefully at our next meeting, we will vote to approve the definitions. Unless one of the voting members wants to make a motion to approve the definitions.
I want to make a motion to go back and clean them up as you suggested and present it at the next meeting.
Okay. But we don't need a formal motion to do that. We will do that.
I just want to note that, Councilman, just again, we frequently in the community are hearing of concerns about the LERTA funds coming out into the community. The work has to be done in between meetings, not just at the meetings. And so I would encourage items like this to be moved to committee and worked on expeditiously so that the funds can be released to the community. Thank you.
There's no committee. You saw to that.
The committee can be established offline. It doesn't have to happen at the meeting. The point of the matter is
board business and should have been voted upon back in February when it was first suggested.
I think that's my point.
It should have been voted upon. You didn't do that. You didn't want that.
Arby, I don't know what you're referencing, but we should move forward. I think the point of the matter that I was making.
We don't need to debate that here and now. The larger point that I think we all can agree.
Thank you, Councilman.
In order to move this forward for the benefit of the community, when the URA sends information out, we cannot afford for none of us to respond and then try to debate it here. We need to respond so we have all the information so that we can hopefully here be making decisions. With that, is it Gordon who's going to go over the applications?
Yes, thank you, Councilman LaBelle.
All right, I'll turn it. We have 3 versions per the request of this committee at our last meeting, which I believe are the individual application, a nonprofit, and one for businesses. And I think we made significant progress on those. Thank you, URA staff. At this time, I'll ask Gordon to turn it over. I'll turn it over to Gordon for presentation.
Thank you, Councilman. Good afternoon, Advisory Board. My name is Gordon Hall, and I'm a project manager with the URA. So this is the first page. This is the language on the first page of the application. In our last advisory board meeting, there was some discussion about including the history of the LERTA on this page. However, after putting a few versions together, we felt that it was too cumbersome and too long for folks to read. So the way that we came up with a solution for that issue is that we linked both the CSIP and the Greater Hill District Neighborhood Reinvestment Fund guidelines to the page, so that when you go to this application, you can click on both of those links. So if you're interested, you can read a little bit more deeply into it. I'll give a moment for folks to look over it. And after that, I do want to highlight this small final paragraph. The final paragraph states that these funds are only available to those persons who reside or work in the Greater Hill District. That's referring to the map on the last slide. This map is included on the inside the application, so folks will be seeing it, but for the intents and purposes of this slide, we had to break it up into multiple slides. But when you see the application, the map would be underneath this language. These funds must be spent to benefit the Greater Hill District. Preference will be given to applicants experiencing and demonstrating hardship. So without further ado, I'm going to jump into the application itself. These are the basic instructions. We have not come up with a timeline on the deadline yet, but this is the general instructions to do the application. And below, you will see this question answered. Councilman Lavelle touched on it, but there will be 3 different types of applications. Say if you're an individual applying for rental assistance, you would click the individual box. However, if you're a business, or a for-profit developer looking for gap financing on a mixed-use development project along Center Avenue, you would select the business application. And say you're an RCO or a nonprofit and you're looking for funding for a workforce development program, you would click the nonprofit page. So with that, we're going to jump into what the different applications look like. Initially, we're going to start with a bit of feedback. This feedback is from Dr. Ellis. Dr. Ellis, I'll allow you to summarize your comments, if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind at all. And thank you for giving me the opportunity. Yeah, when I went through I was really concerned, as you all know, from the last meeting. I was concerned about the individual application. And thank you, URA, for all of your work. I mean, I definitely recognize it. And I don't want to be like the Debbie Downer of the process. I just thought that when I looked at the individual application, it still seemed to be like overly complicated. Like when I was thinking of like, my ideal person would be someone who's like in their 60s, or maybe in their late 50s, and they may or may not have, a grandchild or a child at home, and they're trying to, they need support for their house. And I thought to myself, what is that person going to think when they're filling out this application? And I realized that asking them, when is this project going to start? When is it going to end? They wouldn't necessarily know that. How much do you need? They wouldn't necessarily know that either. And I just think that there was like those things that made the application a little bit more complicated than it needed to be. And I realized that perhaps there should be like a pre-application for individuals and maybe even for businesses, but definitely for individuals, especially who are focused on housing subsidies and repairs, because even with the other URA programs, like the URA will match them with a contractor, right? Like people don't always know who to go to, or, you know, if they're getting scammed, for example, if they're being treated unfairly and all these things. So I was just thinking about the average person that doesn't really know how this process works, but needs their roof repaired or needs some upgrades. So those were my thoughts, but thank you all for your work.
Thank you, Dr. Ellis. Your feedback is noted and well taken. So this is we're on the next slide. We'll begin the application for individuals. This application could be completed after an individual completes a brief pre-application, as per your comments, Dr. Ellis. We do feel that some form of maybe slightly less formal screening could benefit this individual application. So it's certainly something we're taking into consideration. However, if this person needs, say, $20,000 for a roof repair, once that initial screening takes place, there probably will be a more formal application that needs to be filled out, whether it's with the assistance of a URA staff member or a contractor or another third-party program. A more formal application probably will be needed at some point, just for record-keeping sake. But your initial screening or pre-application is certainly well noted, and it's something that we're going to work on incorporating. I see a hand raised. I'm going to pause for a moment and allow Harvey to speak.
Yes. I think to help simplify this, that if we know upfront that they've applied other places and they've been denied, then it should make this process more streamlined. It needs to be as simple as possible for the residents that need the assistance that Dr. Ellis described. And I think one of the programs resides in-house with the URA. So that should be, that individual application needs to really be streamlined and not have to go to another step, especially if it's something urgent in regards to rent or mortgage or taxes, which tend to have a deadline. So, and that needs to be incorporated in the application so that the person can tell you up front, hey, I'm in dire straits and I need this assistance pronto. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Arby. One of your original points was to initially ask an applicant or a prospective applicant if they have applied for another program or other programs. Is that correct? Yes,
because we need to be last resort because we have limited funding. If we had a reoccurring funding source, we could do different things. But and I'll go back to the meeting we had this past Monday. There are people that have applied for things and didn't get help, and they're very discouraged. So those people need to be helped, but you also need to have, one of the comments I had earlier was we need to fund some type of process that people can go to and get an understanding of what they need to do to get assistance, say, from the county or the city or the state for a particular thing. So that when they have been denied and they've exhausted all those other avenues for financial assistance, that they can apply to this fund to get help. So, but a lot of times, that was one of my comments earlier, they don't know if something's available, or they tried and got frustrated. And I think that's what Dr. Ellis was saying, is that a lot of people don't have the technical skills on computer and so forth and so on, or have the patience to go through some things that are very common to us. We're very familiar with. So you have to, and some people could be in survival mode, which is a different frame of mind. So you have to take those things into consideration and make this individual application very, very easy and streamlined.
Understood. Just to focus on the application, if we were to follow Dr. Ellis's suggestion of creating a pre-application or a brief screening, should we consider incorporating, from what I'm hearing from you, just focusing on the application for the time being?
Well, I think that pre-screening can be incorporated within the application so that you don't have to do 2 steps to accomplish one thing.
Okay.
So the pre-screening part is a good idea, but let's incorporate all of that into the same form so that they can, if somebody's in dire straits in survival mode and they really need assistance pronto, we don't want to prolong that by having to go through a then the app, and then the advisory board gets it, they talk about it, they vote on it, and then it goes to the URA board. So there's other steps, and we need to condense that timeline. That's what I meant by there's a lot of gaps here, because there's not one timeline fits everyone, and not one process fits everyone's needs. So what I just described, the application is filed, it gets reviewed, it gets passed on to the advisory board. The advisory board reviews it. It gets passed on to the URA. If somebody needed assistance in 2 weeks, I think we've extended 2 weeks. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying. Thank you, Arby.
Thank you.
Chief Frank, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, it's sort of hard to understand what an application should ask for if you don't understand like what the actual kind of, I don't know what what's the process behind there. So like, I love Dr. Ellis's idea. I think that's the right idea. I think we want a person to be able to say, roof is leaking, I need to fix it, and have that process start to roll. I think we want it to be that simple. And we also want it to be the fund of last resort, which means coordinating with, heaven knows how many other applications there are in the world. Then we're going to need some serious navigation for people. We're going to have to hire, I think, a real navigator who's going to be able to make those kinds of judgments. Like, this person could apply for the city's new sidewalk program or whatever the heck it is. But, we know that's going to take a year and they're desperate right now. And then, make recommendations to the board based on they're helping a person to navigate this system. I just think this is going to be so discouraging for people. It's like, I need a roof, but oh wait, here are 7 things you have to do before, without some real help, because how the heck are people even going to know? And I think you have to have a person having that conversation with them. I don't think you can do that on a piece of paper. That's just my experience trying to do this kind of program work with people. So I guess what I'm saying, and again, maybe people have discussed this, and I apologize if I'm, saying things that are obvious or stupid. But I sort of feel like the application needs to be developed after we understand what the process is and how much of the burden we're going to put on people and how much of the burden we're going to put on a navigator.
Well, you bring good points, and that's one of the reasons why I suggested that the other RCOs get involved, because some of the RCOs already provide resource navigation. Okay, so and they're familiar with the residents and things of that nature. So I agree with your comment.
Yeah, I'm not talking about who, I'm just talking about functions here. Like, who, I see that there's money for administration and so on. There's a way to make it happen. I'm not, and who makes it happen, whatever, but we'll figure that out. But I'm just trying to make a more kind of broad point about how, the front door, you can't say what the front door is if you don't know what's going on in the house.
Agreed.
Thank you, Chief Frank. Appreciate it. Real quick, I'm just going to jump into the applications here. Most of you have seen this. This is the individual application format. This would be the first section. This is when you do click on, if you're an individual applicant and you click on individual, this is the next part of the application, the screen that appears. This is just this is just really basic personal information, name, address, phone number, and email address. This is a little bit about your request. This is where we ask the name of your project. This can also just be the address if that's what you're calling your project. The anticipated start date and the anticipated end date, requested amount, total cost of your project, which neighborhood this is taking place in, the project address. I'm not going to go over this section exhaustively because James has walked us through these definitions. So these are the different categories that somebody can apply for. So to use this as, since this is an individual application, and I do not have enough money in my account to pay my rent for the coming month, I would select category G, rental assistance subsidy, or if I have a severe leak in my roof, I would select category I for housing home repairs. This is section 2 continued. This is just asking for some other basic pieces of information. Just give a moment for folks to peruse over this.
And Gordon, just briefly, I'm still thinking about my targeted audience for an individual. And I think that it's just some of the language can be a little confusing, right? Like the project, a new initiative. I can only imagine somebody saying like, I don't know, I just want my roof done. Like, do I have to create an initiative? What's an initiative? So just, I know it seems really basic, but that's what I'm thinking as I'm reading these.
No, Dr. Ellis, I appreciate it. I mean, from a user experience and a customer standpoint, I really appreciate where you're coming from. Yeah, I think it's something that we need to work on.
Gordon, if
That's
I could make a
something-
suggestion, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
please.
Maybe we could move on to the nonprofit and
Sure.
the business section, and the URA staff will take a stab at rewriting the individual section so it's a little bit more user friendly, because it does seem like there are some big or maybe not errors, but big modifications that we need to make. And I'm not sure how much more we can discuss on this until we make those changes.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah.
Yeah, and I don't mean to belabor it, but if you're going to make it as simple as what Dr. Ellis is talking about, then we also have to understand what's going to happen after that person puts in that very simple application. That, which I'm in favor of that, but I think that's going to require some attention to staffing.
Lisa, can you say a little more about that? I just want to make sure I fully understand.
Well, I love the idea that somebody could fill out an application that could be as simple as, I live in the Hill. I hear there's money for help. Here's what I need help with, and maybe they don't even have to find a box. The boxes could be very simple. So then they send that in. So then what happens? Because what I hear people saying is, we're not going to give you money till we know you've exhausted 8 other things. We're not going to give you money until, right? So like somebody has to field that and then figure out, are we going to give this person a roof? Do we know if this person has applied for the 8 other things? Do we know? And so, I mean, if we had the capacity, my recommendation would be that those things fall on staff, that staff says, great, Mr. Lavelle, I'm going to pick up the phone. I'm going to talk to you about some stuff. And I have a bunch of phone numbers to the county and to the this and to that. Oh, you didn't apply for that? Well, great. I'm going to submit that application on your behalf. Or I'm going to say, I'm not going to submit that application on your behalf because I actually know it takes 1.5 years and you need the money now. So I'm going to waive that requirement in this case. Like, you got to have somebody who's like thinking and doing that work if we want to have an application as simple as that. I think what Dr. Ellis is also saying is that if we don't have an application that's as simple as that, there are going to be a lot of people who are not going to be able to do that work by themselves, and indeed are not even going to understand what's being asked. So to me, that's a big missing piece. It just goes along with the application. The nature of the application has to go with the nature of what's going to happen after the application comes in. And I just like what Dr. Ellis is headed. Application is simple, staff figures this stuff out.
Yeah, and Daniel, sorry, Councilman Lavelle, real quick, the First Source Center, we just went through something, and this is what we do at the First Source Center, not with regard to the LERTA, of course. But so we just had a shift, and I can talk to you about it after this meeting. But I totally agree. Lisa gets me completely. Thank you.
Well, I agree with the concept, but we shouldn't have staff. The individual that's applying should know what they have applied for and what the status is of that application. So the application itself, we should be able to list what's available in the city, the county, and the state, and say, have you applied for this? And if it's a yes, what's the status? And because what you're proposing is imagine a pyramid upside down standing on the point where everyone is focused towards the point, and that point becomes a bottleneck. We don't want to do that, and we don't want to try to answer questions that the individual applicant should already have that information. So we should include in the application, these are available resources. As an example, have you applied for this?
I'll leave it to, there's a lot of expertise on this call, and I have my little experience trying to help people get health insurance, and I've been a navigator, and people, you think they would know, but they don't know.
Yeah.
Half the time they don't know what you're even asking. It's like, what do you mean the exchange? What do you mean, am I Medicaid eligible? What do you mean? And people, sometimes they do, but a lot of times they don't. So that's my experience. Your mileage may vary. And as I said, there are a lot of people who are expert in human services on this call. So I'll leave it there.
Well, you're
Yeah,
correct.
and
All you have
Arby-
to do is just defer, that starts the conversation. It's a format that everybody is going to see, and that starts the conversation. So I agree with your approach. I'm just saying, get the person talking about these things. And if they say, I don't know what you're talking about, then that's a good answer, because now you know that they need assistance with that.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that I don't know, and I have no idea about these. It should be a part of the pre-application. I really believe it. And Arby, if you remember, the URA presented all of their programming, or most of their programming, to the Hill District in the fall. And there were people that work at the URA that said they didn't even know that this program was available, or what this program was called, or so there's a lot of confusion out there. And the navigator would definitely be a different type of civic engager, right? A civic informer of things. And I wouldn't put it on the applicant to know, like, oh, yeah, I applied to Urban League, I applied to Duquesne Light, I don't think that that's realistic.
You got to ask the question, and if they don't know because they didn't know it existed, then that's a starting point.
Yeah, that's true. It should be a part of the application. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about.
You both made your points, and I don't want to cut you off, but Lakeisha has had her hand up for some time now.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to, on this same point, I really agree with what folks have said. And whether it's in a sort of I don't think that there should be necessarily a pre-application per se, but I feel like this specific individual application is just going to be different and perhaps be longer, because I think that we do need to give people like links to all of those other resources, right? And also just in reference to like these questions, and I do appreciate that the URA is going to go back and kind of rehash this particular piece. But in terms of like how much it's going to cost, right? Like we need to make sure that that there's something, right, like in the instruction sheet or whatever, like that says, before you fill out this application, right, these are all of the things you need to know. And so if someone's coming to apply for money for their roof, for instance, right, but they need to know how much money they need to be asking for, that perhaps we want to say, like, you need to have a quote from a roofer, and that roofer needs to have X, Y, and Z in terms of be like a bonded professional, blah, blah, blah. I think that those things need to be spelled out in terms of what the funds can be used for, but just making sure that folks are right, not necessarily asking their cousin, right, to do this work. And so, yeah, I think that there just needs to be sort of this instruction sheet, and maybe not necessarily a pre-application where they have to wait for our response, but something that kind of spells out all of the things that they need to have in line before they fill out the application, if that makes sense. Right, because that also would help them with like the timeline for how long it would take to fix a roof or whatever the situation is. And then even in reference to number 5, I think that we need to actually just tell the person, well, either eliminate that question or tell people what they need to write, right? In terms of that, how will the project further the purpose, right? Because sometimes people are not necessarily thinking about this overarching piece that a lot of us might be thinking of, right? And so we need to say, yeah, having, stable homes are important, blah, blah, blah. Because people might not really be thinking about that. They're just thinking about their own family. So either we give them the answer, right, as like a starting point, or we just take that question out completely. Even in terms of like number 6, that we either tease them the answer or we take that question out completely. And that's it in terms of this piece for my comments.
Thank you. I want to respond to your one comment very quickly. Some of these questions, we've gotten bogged down into a conversation of, is someone looking for rent subsidy? But the individual application can be for much more than that. And so some of these questions were meant to capture other things an individual may be working on, whether they're trying to build a home, whether they're trying to start a business. So there's a lot of questions in here that are meant to capture all those categories that have the definitions that we went through. With that being said, it's almost 4:30. What I would like to do is, there are a number of you who have made very valid and strong opinions and suggestions that are appropriate about what this application should and could look like. My fear is the URA is going to take note of all of this. We're going to go back, try to capture this to the extent we can. A month from now, come back and it still not be adequate. What I would like, if there are a number of you who'd be willing to form a subcommittee to work with the URA over the course of the next month and bring back an application that you believe the full body would be willing to support. Because just keep in mind, the goal is to get these dollars on the street as soon as possible to help those that we're all advocating for now.
Yes. So the answer is definitely yes from me.
So are you volunteering, Dr. Ellis?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And I saw Chief Frank.
And now also, this is Lakeisha. I think I had signed up to be on the application committee back in February, but then I didn't hear anything from anybody.
Okay. So
I want to be on the application committee. I signed up in February also, didn't hear anything, so.
Okay, so.
And Chief Frank, will Chief Frank be with us?
Yes, she raised her hand.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I will work with Julie to get a special meeting scheduled where we can all meet to go through the application, as well as even streamline or refine some of the definitions. With
And
that
I
being,
think, and can we meet next week? I mean, can we just put it on, can we just have a commitment that we'll meet sometime next week and jump in while it's fresh and we can get it done? I mean, we're almost there. We're like right there.
I think we're close. What I would like to do is have Gordon just actually finish the application.
Right.
We actually didn't get through it.
Okay.
And so I think that's part of the reason why even Lakeisha had one of her questions was because we didn't see it in context of the full application. And so we don't have to critique it now. I just want you all to see it so that when we meet, maybe potentially next week or within 2 weeks, that it's fresh in your mind and we can get directly into it.
So
So
go ahead, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I raised my hand really quickly just to ask if it would be in the group's best interest and in the community's best interest, because I know that there is a lot of pressure, right, for these funds to be available, that we actually give ourselves an actual deadline for when we're going to make this public, right? Because then that way it puts a level of accountability on us. We could potentially release that date to the public. Right, and then there's a relationship where folks are like, yeah, it's going to be out by this particular date, right? I mean, I feel like, we're about to go into the holidays. I feel comfortable with like a January 2nd type opening, right? And then people can look forward to that and be ready for it once the new year hits. But that's my suggestion, is that we put a date on it and make that public.
Towards your recommendation, the goal was to have this completed by the end of this year, meaning the application plan, the allocation plan, and then the application itself, so that it could be released in the beginning of the new year. Excuse me. So I think it's fair to accept that as a goal.
Yeah, and I kind of want to recommend December 1st. I mean, we're almost there. So like having the application open or having the pre-application open, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And to be honest, I think that we're probably going to be flooded with applications, and it gives us some time to sort some things out and to see exactly what's happening. And are we making our allocations reflect the community need?
I agree with, go ahead.
I just wanted to jump in and throw some hesitation in here, and I do it with a bit of reservation, but just kind of keeping stock of the depth of the conversation that Chief Frank and Dr. Ellis were really driving, to the extent that there's going to need to be a lot of administrative infrastructure to be able to verify documents, information, all of those things. I think it may take more time than January 1st. If that is the level of, if we're trying to achieve, the goal of having these applications be as simple, and then have on the back end, have them be as expedient as possible. So I just wanted to throw that comment out there.
Comment well taken, I agree.
Can I ask a question? I guess this is to James or anybody else at the URA who's working on the application. So if we meet in the next week or so, perhaps when we meet, we can kind of do sort of like a walkthrough of what we believe the process would be from beginning to end, so that we can even understand from the technical standpoint, like on the back end, right? Like what, in terms of receiving documents like online or in person, right? Like how long it would take in terms of like back office to cut a check, right? If we can kind of walk through that as the application committee or whatever, I think that would be helpful, so that we can just really look at what all of the steps are. in the total process, right? And so that we can be as transparent even in terms of being able to be responsive to the community about what the process actually entails.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea to really spend some time with process mapping, because I think that's going to determine a lot of where there might be potential kinks or lags or bottlenecks or something like that. And to your point, you know, trying to make this as seamless as possible, or at least set expectations properly, would provide us also with a wealth of information. So I'm supportive of that idea.
Thank you all. I'm going to run through these last two applications quickly. They're going to look familiar to us all, since it's pretty similar to the individual application. So right now we're going to jump into the nonprofit and the business application. And since they're so similar, we're just kind of going to go through them together. So this is the first page that a nonprofit applicant will select. They will see their basic information asked. And really the only thing that's changed is just on the bottom left corner is that nonprofit status. Oops. If you see here on the business application, this is the first page of the business application. It looks exactly the same as the nonprofit application. There's just not a nonprofit status option is missing for the business application. So moving
Gordon,
on.
can I ask you a question
Yes, Letitia.
really quickly? So when you say nonprofit status, or is that like a question as, does that group have a 501c3 or do they have a fiscal sponsor? Is that what you mean? Or what, like, are they 501c3 or C4? Is that what you mean?
Yes, one of the 501c3 or C4. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. We have gone over the category definitions, so I'm not going to spend any time on this. These are the same category definitions that James walked us through earlier. We spent a bit of time on these questions earlier. So very similar to the individual application. This is the sources and uses. If there's any other funds involved in the project, particularly for, you know, a development project, we'd like to see that. But this is for development projects only. Does this applicant have site control? Explain and provide evidence of site control. And this is the attachment checklist. And this is the final page for any further certifications. That's all we have for the application.
That's great. That's great for nonprofits and businesses.
Thank you. And thank you all for your feedback with these applications. I think
Thank you for your
we
effort.
as a group really raised some good points.
Thank you all.
With
Thank
that,
you Gordon, for your effort.
yeah, thank you. With that, I will give the floor back to Councilman Lavelle. Thanks all.
So new business, we have two items to go over for everyone. First is the Greater Hill District Neighborhood Advisory Fund Advisory Board members' terms. This advisory board has been meeting for 1 year now, and for some members, their initial term limit was 1 year. Those members with expiring terms can continue to serve on the Greater Hill District Neighborhood Reinvestment Fund Advisory Board until they choose to resign, a new representative is nominated, or the current member is reappointed to their seat. Members serving on an expired term can continue to make motions and vote. This is just more of an informational, so all of you all are aware. The URA will send letters to the member organizations with the expired terms. The new term will be 3 years that retroactively start October of 2022.
And I'm sorry, Daniel, I'm sorry, Councilman Lavelle, did you say they can vote and can make motions? Yeah. Oh, okay, yes. Continue as though they since the beginning, okay.
It's more of a technicality, but just making people aware. Next, I wanted to
I'm sorry,
go.
Councilman. I'm trying to work this. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Will a list be sent out with the confirmed terms? Because we went through that before and there was some question.
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you.
So I have a question. Why do we have the terms? Are they necessary? I don't, it's for the Hill, and to limit somebody's voice, especially organizations that have been around for 20, 30 years, doesn't make sense to me. And it's arbitrary. What, one year, 2 year, 3 year, what's the basis for that?
Arby, I had actually talked to David Geiger about this a little bit because I wasn't understanding either. And he had mentioned that staggered terms were important so that we could keep some continuity on the board. And because there are changes in office, with the mayor's office, for example, with the Allegheny County, there is turnover there. So having staggered starts makes sense.
Well, in one regard, yes, but in the most important regard, no. The institution should be permanent. Now, and they decide which individual.
The institution, so as an example, the institution, Historic Hill, or the institution, Hill District Consensus Group, or the institution, Hill CDC, are permanent seats. It's a matter of who they send to represent them, and those are term limited.
Okay, so my point is the individual entity, Hill CDC, Consensus Group, Historic Hill, they make that determination. Why are we trying to go and tell them how to conduct their business? That doesn't make sense.
We're not. Okay, here's an example. The mayor appoints all URA board members. I was appointed to the URA board. However, my term expires and he can either reappoint me, I can sit on an expired term, or he can reappoint someone in my place. But I get appointed for a 4-year term. All we're saying is these institutions have appointments. Some of those appointments have expired. Those members can still participate. They can still do everything. We're just notifying you that you may want to say, we're reappointing Arby for another 3-year term, or whatever it may be.
Well, here's the thing. You made a key phrase that's very important, reappointment. The way it's written in the procedure, the guideline, it doesn't say that the entities are permanent, but the representative is appointed 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. That needs to be clarified. The institution is permanent. The representative is 1 year, 2 year, 3 year. They should all be 3 years. It doesn't matter because the entity makes the decision. Just in your example with the mayor making the appointment, the mayor makes the appointment. That is the institution, and the institution is a permanent fixture on the board. So the reappointment is the responsibility of the institution. It's not laid out that way in the current document. It needs to be
Understood.
clarified.
Yeah. I agree with RB too. And I also wanted to know, is there a possibility to change chairs from the community?
I don't believe so. I would need to go back and review the rules.
I would too, and I can do that, Dr. Ellis, for our next meeting.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And Arby, I will also look into the appointments and get some clarity on how it's structured.
Thank you. So I asked a question. This had to have been February meeting about the validity of the URA imposing this document on the board and why the board didn't have the opportunity to write its own document. And I think that is why we are still discussing application now where this could have been done first quarter of this year, but the focus was on this document for this board, which is misguided. So now we're delayed. So I need to understand what the legal validity of one entity imposing upon another entity, how they're going to conduct their business. And also whether this board is subject to the sunshine law. Most of the people, the majority of the people that I've talked to said it should be. So I would like a legal brief, not an opinion. Because one of the things that people are asking for is transparency and how things are conducted and how things are determined and things of that nature. And this would be a good first step in that direction. And I've asked for this back in November and again in February.
When you first asked, was this open to the sunshine law? We said that it was not. In terms of transparency, these meetings are recorded and posted online for any and all to review.
Yes, you have said that. And I'm asking for a legal brief that says that, because everyone I've talked to says that the sunshine law should apply, which means you can't mute board members. Okay, so you can't conduct this meeting in the same manner that the EMC is conducted. So there needs to be a clarification of that, because the last meeting that we had ended, that was not good. From what I understand with Robert's Rules of Order, the chair is supposed to facilitate the meeting, not obstruct it. So just to have some clarification there.
I have to say, I agree, Councilman, when you left, it was just a disaster, and it's really unacceptable on every level. On every level, it's unacceptable. And it's a problem across the board in a lot of these different meetings. It's the same person, the same problems. You know, you just can't do that.
That is correct. I agree with you totally.
Okay.
Robert's Rules of Order is supposed to allow everybody to have an equal voice. That's the intention of it. And the chair is supposed to facilitate that, not obstruct it.
That's true, but Robert's Rules also allows, if you know how to use them appropriately, to silence people from speaking.
Well,
which is why when we first started this, I was actually asked not to utilize Robert's Rules, because it does allow you to silence people.
But that silencing just isn't by one person. It has to be voted on. You just can't silence a person by pushing a button.
Your point is made. I'm not trying to debate you. I was being more.
Right, I'm not trying to do that either. I just want clarity and fairness. Fair.
We will understood, and we will get you an opinion on the Sunshine Act. Is there any other? I'm gonna jump to new business. Is there any other new business that members need to take up?
So I have one question. If we're going to meet as a subcommittee next week, and we're proposing to meet, which I think would be the third week of November, do you think that we have enough time with the subcommittee to do its work, to be able to present something? I'm not seeing, especially with the new person, I think her name was Alicia, I'm not sure. She brought up good points. I was bringing up the same point, the process and how you define it. There's a lot of gaps there. That's what I meant. And whether or not we're going to be able to have a product that closes the majority of these gaps in 2 weeks.
I don't know the answer to that question, Arby. But I would encourage us to push as hard as possible to get there.
I agree.
Yeah, and it sounds as though the URA staff with Councilman Lavelle, they're going to work on the definitions and the language and, you know, make that better. Those of us who are on the subcommittee, we will work to focus on that individual application, right? And making that more palatable and accessible. And then we come together and we have solved, you know, a lot of issues and we can move forward.
But there's a missing element, and that's process. There's a gap between what we're discussing and the process of how things will flow. So
Right. Well,
they-
we should discuss
that's
that in
the
the
part-
subcommittee too.
Right, that's what I'm talking about. And I think that piece may entail more than we expect.
Okay.
Oh, it
Thank
absolutely will. We started giving thought to that. It will. With that, I would just recommend that as we work to schedule this next meeting, that we look to schedule it for 2 hours.
I agree.
Will do.
If there's no other new business, I want to thank you all for being here. Is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you all for your time.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody.
Thanks.
All
Thank
right.
you. Take care.
Take care. Have a good evening.